is father to Jen and Liad and partner to David. Welcome, Ambassador Miron.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon to our Bostonian friends and American friends, and Erev Tov, good evening to our Israeli friends, and happy Earth Day to everybody. I would like to first and foremost thank Miriam May and David Lera from the Arava Institute for their support in organizing this webinar. And thank you as well to the Arava's incoming Executive Director, Dr. Tarek Muhammad. We're also very grateful today for the participation of the councillors O'Malley, who I had the honor to meet not too long ago, and Ms. Wharton, who I am still to meet, I hope in Boston in the summer. And we're eager to learn from you both today. We're here to discuss the shared challenges and opportunities on the municipal level regarding sustainability. Now, while cities and urban spaces exist on limited land mass, they have proven to be instrumental in terms of sustainable innovation. And we hope that this conversation opens opportunities to further dialogue between the two cities and to promote a just and equitable effort to address the climate change, of course. Israel is one of the world's leading countries in the field of climate innovation and can be a leading international force in the provision of answers and solutions to the climate crisis. The world is experiencing a growing need for practical solutions in the climate crisis, in both the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and the adaptation and resilience of building in areas such as agriculture, water, food security, etc. These needs are critical for humanity to prosper and to survive in the growing and expanding conditions of climate change and acute environmental crisis, of course. This could be Israel's biggest contribution to the cause of building a better world. Another area where Israel holds a global record is the prevention of water loss in urban systems, where in Israel just a few % of water is lost in urban supply systems. In other countries in the world, it can be as much as dozens of %. So there are some municipalities in Israel that still have to improve. Israel also has an experience with advanced technologies to offer in the field of renewable energy, and Israeli companies offer groundbreaking solutions in energy efficiency and energy storage solutions. Noteworthy are the development of technologies that streamline the solar energy production process, the development of energy storage technologies based on air compression, or on the storage of energy in ice and more. Apps that monitor energy use in your home, helping consumers become more energy efficient and save electricity, and even electric roads that supply energy to the vehicles traveling on them are also noteworthy. Other developments from the worlds of innovation, app development, AI material recycling, and increasing use of more energy efficient materials in industry and more, which can and should be embraced in addressing the climate crisis, are also noteworthy. Israel is well placed to contribute significantly to the field of climate innovation and should maximize its capacities in this area for the benefit of the entire world. Despite all of this innovation, we must also build international collaborations, and that is exactly why we are here today. The climate crisis represents a real opportunity to establish such collaborations, and it is important that they be given that they be included in any economic, scientific, or environmental and business plan. Given the fact that Israel is highly technologically advanced a country, but geographically very small, and a small economy in itself. This international cooperation is very important for us, and we support and command any collaboration on the municipal level between American and Israeli cities on the fields of sustainability, environmental justice, and climate innovation. And thank you very much for your time, and I hope we have a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm now going to introduce our two guest panelists. But before I do, I just want to remind the audience that if you do have questions, please write them into the Q&A section, and we will get back to those questions towards the end of the program. It's now my honor to introduce City Councilor Matt O'Malley, who serves as the Council President Pro Tem and District 6 Representative to the Boston City Council. His district includes the neighborhoods of Jamaica Plain. The Friends of the Irvine Institute once had an office in Jamaica Plain, right next to the Sam Adams Brewery. West Roxbury, parts of Roslyn, Roxbury, in the back of the hill. Councilor O'Malley is the chair of Environment, Resiliency, and Parks Committee. Councilor O'Malley has led on environmental initiatives such as promoting net zero carbon building standards, eliminating gas leaks, eliminating single-use plastic bags, and diverting organics through curbside composting in the city of Boston. Councilor O'Malley lives in West Roxbury with his wife, Catherine, and his daughter, Margot. And I'm also going to now introduce our second panelist, Dr. Laura Wharton. Dr. Laura Wharton is a member of Jerusalem City Council as a representative of Merits and an adjunct lecturer in the Department of Political Science at the Hebrew University. Born in the US, City Councilor Wharton immigrated to Israel after receiving a BA with honors from the Department of Government at Harvard University, and then served a full term in the Israeli Defense Force. After spending a decade in Kibbutz Kfar Blum, she moved to Jerusalem, where she completed a master's degree and a PhD at Hebrew University. On the City Council, Wharton holds the portfolio for the advancement of women, in addition to devoting much of her time to the situation in East Jerusalem and rights of the Palestinian residents. She is an active member in the Finance Committee, the Allocations Committee, and the Committee for the Environment. City Councilor Wharton recently initiated a citywide initiative for tree planting and has led opposition within the council to the massive building White Ridge building project on the outskirts of the city. She is a mother of two. Why don't we start with Councilor Wharton? Would you like to open the discussion on sustainability in urban settings?
Okay, certainly. Thank you very much. Thank you for our hosts from the Arava Institute, and to you, and to Ambassador Malley, to Ambassador Marone, and to Councillor Malley. I'm also really very grateful to have this opportunity, because I very much believe in citizen involvement, and I understand that I hope there will be a lot of people involved listening and offering questions and advice. And also I welcome the work together with the City of Boston and other cities. I think it's important. I'll just say in a word too that Israel is I think the second most urbanized country in the world, with 93% of its population living in cities, and that percentage continues to grow. But we're, at the same time, we've done, I think, a lot of work that's is significant in terms of use of water, desalination, drip irrigation, all kinds of things that save water, in addition to developing solar energy, of which we were, I think, really quite pioneers already in the 60s. We're developing it. And I can say that for now, we are continuing trying to confront the issues. I always hope that we can, as much as possible, initiate projects and improve environmental awareness and urban sustainability. We have, from the negative side, though, more and more reminders because of global warming. So we have both a carrot and a stick working all the time, I think. And I also mentioned that I think in Jerusalem in particular, where we have a lot of challenges because we have a great variety of population. We have Palestinians in East Jerusalem, Israelis in West Jerusalem. We have ultra-Orthodox communities that have less, or have until recently, I think, less awareness to issues of sustainability, and other populations with more. And we try to bring them all together. In terms of urban sustainability together, I could just say as an opening that I think people everywhere, and in Jerusalem as well, are becoming, I think, increasingly aware of how important it is not just to preserve the environment and to treasure what we have around us, but also for our own health, both our physical health in terms of clean air and water, but also for our mental health. I think I've heard a presentation that was very interesting from someone from the Ministry of Health about studies done about what it does to people and the psychological effects on people when they live amongst trees versus if they, live in an urban jungle. So we are struggling here always to try to do what we can to prove that, both to respect what is around us and also to help preserve our own health and well-being. And I'm looking forward to the questions and commenting as we go along to see how we can learn from one another about these things. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wharton. And Councillor O'Malley, how is Boston trying to address the issue of urban sustainability?
Well, thank you, David. And first off, thank you for moderating this. It's great to be with Councillor Wharton. We haven't met in person yet. I had the incredible privilege of visiting Jerusalem nearly 10 years ago in 2012 with the Jewish Community Relations Council. It was a life-changing trip. And it's like, I cannot wait to go back. God willing, things will be safer in the not too distant future and we can resume travel. And while I was there, I was really struck just by the innovation as it relates to environmentalism, as it relates to sustainability. And even as Miran was sort of going through in his opening remarks, I was taking notes just to see how we can catch up in many ways to both embracing technology and innovation to deal with the climate crisis. David, I loved your opening remarks talking about going to an Earth Day rally when you were in the 8th grade. I had a similar situation. I remember being in the 4th grade and reading 50 Ways to Save the Planet. And from there, I was hooked and became an environmentalist ever since. In Boston, I'm really grateful that my colleagues over the last decade have allowed me to serve as the Environment Sustainability Chairman, because we've been able to really push some ambitious and effective legislation. First with former Mayor Tom Menino, then Mayor Walsh, who was recently named the Labor Secretary, and now we have Acting Mayor Kim Janey. And to a person, each mayor has really embraced some tough decisions as it relates to sustainability. I think the political climate has evolved quicker on issues around sustainability and environmental action than perhaps any other political movement in our lifetime. I often joke that when I was a relatively fresh-faced counselor, I first broached the idea of doing a plastic bag ban, which of course many other countries have been doing for decades. In the United States, we've been slow to catch up, and I couldn't find one counselor to put his or her name on the bill as a co-sponsor. And then several years later, we were able to pass it unanimously. And that's just one example of how I think the political winds have changed and people really are able to embrace some difficult decisions and some important and effective legislation and ordinances going forward. Boston is, of course, a coastal city, and I think that we've seen some really impactful weather events every year. In 2015, we had 108 inches of snow over the course of a winter. I forget the exact number, but for the month of February 2015, I think we had snow on 23 of 28 days, or some just really unbelievable number. We've seen some nor'easters, which are some really impactful storms that commence with wind and rain and has caused flooding in many of our neighborhoods. So people are willing to do the work. And as I was saying before we got on the call, we were at sort of just a little briefing and get to know you conversation. Boston has been really adept at putting some ambitious goals in place, but actually doing the work and making the policies in place to hit those targets and those goals is always a challenge, but we are getting there. So what we're focused on primarily now as it relates to sustainability is building standards, how we look and diffuse and get rid of waste and trash to help us eventually get to a zero waste city, how we collect our energy sources. Although we're a very, forward-thinking city and a progressive city and a city that I think most voters would consider themselves environmental voters, we don't have the infrastructure for a lot of renewable energy sources. So that's one thing that we've been working to change. There's no question we have a tremendous amount of work to do, but I'm very emboldened and sanguine about the policies that everyone is putting forward. And to be completely candid, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more later, President Biden has really set the right tone as it relates to environmental justice. And that's been a crucial point of how we look at our policies going forward. And it essentially means that everyone has the same benefit of environmental legislation, and no one should suffer disproportionate negative impacts that are caused by climate change. So the work is daunting, but it's doable. And I know we're all committed to getting some things done.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Malley. I just want to point out that I think your story from your childhood and my story from my childhood just points out how important education is, just how important it is to get to people at a young age, to imbue in them the love for nature and the feeling of ownership of the planet. So that's something to keep in mind. Both Jerusalem and Jerusalem is an old, very old city. Boston's old, but not quite as old. But you both face challenges when it comes to the daily commuter congestion, carbon emissions, traffic. What kinds of efforts are being undertaken in each of these cities to address this issue of transportation? Who would like to start?
I'll start if that's okay. Well, we're doing a number of things. First of all, we are the second city in Israel, just after Haifa, that instituted an low emission zone policy that we've now extended to the whole city. So what we have are cameras set around the entrances to the city, the roads leaving the city, and any vehicle that is above the emissions regulations for the city is fined if it enters the city, and we've been started publicizing that. It was just went into effect this July, but we're hoping that will have a positive effect. We've also started using more electric buses. We just renewed a tender that I think is good for the next 3 years. With various bus companies, and a requirement has been that they have a certain percentage of electric buses, with the hopes that we'll reach 100% electric buses in the city. We've been doing a lot to encourage public transportation. The two most notable things, I think, are the light rail, which we've been working on. We have one line that's already been in use for a number of years. We're now expanding to have 2 or 3 more lines that will crisscross the city, and the use of them has gone beyond the expectations. It's been a great success. We've also been doing a lot to put in 2 things. One is bus lanes, so that it becomes an advantage to take a bus, that you can get faster, so that people have incentive to leave their cars and get on the bus because they have a free lane open to them all the time. And the last thing that I'd mention is the bicycle lanes. It's a little bit tricky in Jerusalem because it's a hilly city, but we do have both bicycle lanes. We've put in tens of kilometers of bicycle lanes, and also now have rent a bicycle system that's open, that we're hoping to also expand to encourage the expanded use of bicycles. So we've been trying to do a lot about that. We still have a lot to do. We have a lot of problems of congestion, but we're hoping that some combination of, I said, limiting the polluting vehicles that come in, and encouraging the use of public transportation will, at some point work to cut down the congestion and keep the air cleaner.
Councillor Wharton, I wanted to just ask, Tel Aviv has, a large parking area outside of the city, and a shuttle bus system, which actually I've taken a few times personally and found it convenient. Are there any plans for such a parking space outside of the city to encourage people not to bring their cars into the city?
I was hoping there would be. At this point, what we have is a big parking lot that is under construction right now. I drove by it this morning. They're making progress. That's close to the entrance to the city, and it is right next to a place where 3, for now 1, but eventually 3 different light rail lines will meet. So it won't it won't discourage people from bringing the cars into the city at all, but at least they'll come in and park right at the entrance and move along. There are also 3 different large parking lots next to stations of the light rail at the extremes to encourage people to go there, leave their car, and move on.
Thank you. And Councillor O'Malley.
So prior to the pandemic, Boston had the dubious distinction of having the worst traffic of any city in America. Worse than LA, worse than Chicago, worse than New York City, worse than cities that had multiple times the population that we do. And it's, as you both know, and many people watching this know, the United States, we're a very car-centric country. A much larger country than Israel. Many people have cars, and a way to encourage individuals to leave their cars at home or to only rely on public transportation is to make it better and to make it more affordable. In Boston, we have the oldest public transit system in the country, the MBTA, Mass Bay Transit Authority. It has been saddled with debt for a generation plus now. And rather than seeing investments the way many other cities have put into their public transportation systems, we've seen cuts, we've seen reduced services, we've seen reduced lines. And it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy of fewer and fewer people are going to take advantage of it. So one thing that sort of changed in this conversation pre-pandemic, but even I believe will continue post-pandemic, is investing heavily in the MBTA to incentivize more and more people to use it. It's become quite a topic of conversation in our mayor's race currently happening right now. You have candidates who are talking about having a completely free transportation process. The acting mayor has and other councilors who are running for mayor have asked for a fare free for buses only, so still allow for a charge with the subway system and the trolleys. So I think that we're moving in that direction. That should work. Obviously, we need to invest heavily from the state in terms of the infrastructure and even just growing what the range of service and covered area for our public transit could be. But it is a huge, we're at a tipping point on traffic, and actually making the politically courageous decision to invest heavily in our public transit, I think, will be the most impactful way to address traffic congestion and all the ills that come with that. Similarly, we have, much like Jerusalem, been looking at dedicated bus lanes, which is another way to encourage someone to take public transit if they're going to get to work quicker. We've had a real focus on building transit-oriented development, and we've, in many cases, eliminated parking restriction or parking guidelines for that new development. So basically, there will not be a guaranteed parking spot, and an individual, of course, would have the right to still own a car, but he or she may opt not to if there's no dedicated parking spot. And then the third thing that I've been really focused on this is micro-mobility. So not only bikes and bike shares and expanding those, which we should do, but looking at e-scooters and looking at other innovative ways to help move people around. Boston is a relatively small city geographically, but much of our population seems to be concentrated in fewer neighborhoods, and you have less access to our MBTA hubs, our transit hubs. So by bringing in some of these electric scooters, e-assist bikes, we could potentially be able to move people from their home, from their neighborhood to a transportation hub, and then be able to get in. The last thing that I think will really be impactful is just as a world, how things will change post-pandemic and post-pandemic life, with more and more people working from home will certainly help, at least part of their work week will certainly help alleviate some of the congestion. But public transit is the absolute crucial key to this puzzle, and I am hopeful that there will be some significant change and significant investment going forward.
Councillor O'Malley, since you've mentioned the pandemic and its impact, one of our viewers, Stuart Schoenfeld, has asked if there is any truth to this idea of COVID exodus, that people are leaving urban centers. Have people been leaving Boston and moving to the suburbs? And if that is the case, how do you then address the public transit issues that could cause?
So you're not seeing it in Boston, and I'm well aware, because the real estate market in Boston has never been hotter. I think that's an excellent question, and there's no doubt that we all probably know people who may have lived in cities and have gone for usually less expensive homes with more land in rural areas or in ex-urban areas. Boston's housing market has never been hotter than it is right now. And there's very good reason for that. We are a city of eds and meds, we're called, higher education, medicine. The economy is thriving. I think that will continue. And to your point about when I was first elected to this seat in 2010, that was the first year that a majority of the world's population lived in urban settings. I think we were like 50.3% of the world. It had never happened before. And now, as you said, we're up to 54, 55%, could be 60% within the decade. So people want to live in cities, and we need to be aggressive in our housing goals and how we build that. There's also an opportunity to build net zero carbon construction, which will both allow for greater density while not increasing our greenhouse gas emissions, the vast majority of which in Boston come from our buildings.
So that's actually a great segue into the next question I want to explore, which is how does the need for build sustainability in housing, which usually means investing more in housing to make them sustainable, to make them more energy efficient, more to invest in infrastructure in a way that we're reducing energy use and reducing water leaks and keeping cool or hot air in and so forth. How does that impact the affordability of housing?
I'll tackle that one first. It's a great question, and I often say that every fiscal conservative ought to be an environmentalist. And this is typically the first example that I cite to back up that argument, that not only energy efficient homes, but net zero carbon built homes and passive homes that meet the passive house standards will save you money. The upfront cost right now is essentially de minimis. The cost of PV paneling, the cost of thicker windows, the cost of thicker insulation. There are so many federal rebates in the United States and even state rebates that you can often save money on construction costs. And to your point, David, the utility savings is felt almost immediately within a matter of months. The city there's a city in Pennsylvania, I believe it's Pittsburgh, but I could be wrong. It's not Philadelphia. It's a large city in Philadelphia, mandated that all affordable housing would meet passive house standards. And immediately they saw some incredible savings for their residents. I followed that lead and I wrote the ordinance that's going to create all municipal buildings in Boston will now be able to meet that standard. Again, it's right for the environment. Nearly 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions in an older city, an older American, by American standards, city like Boston, come from our buildings. And the upfront savings that we see on new construction for homes and utilities is felt almost immediately. Similarly, where we have the public land where we can build and grow out some of that infrastructure, you're going to see savings right off the bat. There's a school in a suburb of Boston called the Hastings School, which was built when the first elementary schools built as net zero carbon. They had enough space that they put a PV canopy over their parking lot, and they generate 500,000 more kilowatt hours of energy than they consume. So they create enough energy that they can power a school, which is a huge energy consumer, and they can also give back, I believe it's 500,000 kilowatt hours back to the city. So the benefits here are just too numerous to count.
So thank you, Matt. So Councillor Wharton, I love Jerusalem in the summer. In the winter, Jerusalem houses, which are, I think, just basically built for the summer to be nice and cool, are a disaster in the winter. I mean, and you've got buildings, old buildings, you've got massive building that was built basically, from what I understand, poured cement covered with beautiful Jerusalem stone. What do we do? How do we make how do we refurbish these houses to make them energy efficient for a world that is going to need to become more energy efficient?
Well, first of all, I'll say we have a lot to learn, and it's very nice to hear what Councilor O'Malley was saying and what you have to suggest, because we don't, as far as I know, we're really just at the beginning of learning what it means to have such kind of building and to have building restrictions. We have a lot of problems all over the city trying to enforce basic city regulations. We're still trying to encourage people to do all that is necessary to make their homes, earthquake proof, which is a big, serious concern in the city, and a bunch of other things. So as far as I know, we don't have yet any real city bylaws that relate to these things, or as far as I know, also national laws that really relate to this. What we have seen in continuation of what the other two speakers, my two colleagues here, have said, there is increasing awareness that it is worthwhile to start putting these in, that is worthwhile for the people who build. We have a few examples of buildings that are, that stand by the European environmental and criteria. We have a coffee house that's in a park here. We have something called the Mandel Center, which was set up as a model of such a building that has a green roof and has all the kind of protections and insulation that makes it a green building. And interestingly enough, just a couple of months ago, we had a presentation from people from the the U.S. State Department, because there's now a big plan for a lot of building to be done for the new U.S. Embassy, and that is going to be apparently up to all the standards for environmental building. We do have, as I said, work that is done about saving water, saving electricity. Many, maybe even most Jerusalem homes have solar panels. So there are things that are done that make them, relatively energy efficient. But I think in terms of the building itself, we have a lot yet to learn.
So I'm not here just to make your life difficult by asking you difficult questions. I also have solutions. Ambassador Meron, Ruben mentioned Dr. Taraka Muhammad, who is going to replace me as executive director of the RFI Institute. But Tarek is, first of all, a resident of East Jerusalem. He's from Slovakia, and he is the head of our Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation. He has been working on a project around vacuum tubes, which can be used on the face of a building to warm up the building from the sun. And I would be happy to invite you down to the RFI Institute to get a tour of the Institute, to meet Tarek, and to have us show you this new building approach, which could be a very good answer for Jerusalem's cold winters.
Thank you. I'll already take you up on that. I know Tarek, and we met here. We've met a few times, and I'll be happy to come down and both learn from him and from you, and bring as much as I can to the city. So
Great.
Thank you.
You mentioned, Councilor Wharton, you mentioned the importance of green space. That's really become an important concept in urban sustainability, I think, everywhere. Boston has absolutely beautiful parks. What are we doing in Jerusalem? What are we doing in Boston to make sure that green spaces are preserved and are really utilized? And this also, I think, gets into a bit of the issue of environmental justice as well. Are those places in the right places, in places where everybody has equal access to? So we'll start with you, Councilor Wharton.
Okay, well, I think, as I said, we've been beginning to work on this the way it should be. We have not just growing awareness, but a lot of work being done. In fact, we have a GIS map on the city site that includes a layer of urban nature sites, and even a layer with special trees of note. So they're all mapped out. You can go in and see them, and it's quite impressive, I think. The city now has invested and is investing in developing a number of large parks that are strategically positioned, including one in East Jerusalem. For the first time, we're going to be developing the biggest park that's in East Jerusalem, in an area called Wadi Joz, and I'm proud of that. There are also in Jerusalem now more than 80 community gardens that have been developed That's something that the city has actually just been responding to, because it started with individual neighborhoods and individual residents developing them, and the city kind of learned from the people, and it's a real bottom-up development. And so there are now a couple of people in City Hall who are responsible for helping coordinate and make sure that the people in charge of the community gardens have all that they need, from helping them get the water to the spades and shovels and plants and whatever. And the last thing I'd say that you mentioned at the outset was that we have this initiative now for tree planting. So we have now a plan to plant 6,000 trees in the sidewalks in kind of I know what you call them, kind of spaces in the sidewalks all over Jerusalem. And we're hoping to get them all in by September, when a Shnat Shmita starts, which is a year of letting the soil replenish itself, which is in Jewish law, and the city will be recognizing that. So there won't be any planting from September till the following September.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Malley.
So one statistic that I am enormously proud of, and I played a small role with a whole host of very talented and dedicated public officials, is we can now in 2021 boast that every Bostonian lives within a 10-minute walk to a park or open space. And the way we're able to achieve that statistic was through two mechanisms: funding and partnerships. And I'll start with the funding. We passed several years ago a amendment to our finance structure called the Community Preservation Act, the CPA, and it is a 1% surcharge on our property taxes that goes into a dedicated fund that will help support affordable housing, green and park space, or historic preservation. Three needs that we need, and I know Jerusalem does as well, is a beautiful old, incredible city. It passed overwhelmingly, and it's rare that any tax increase will pass overwhelmingly anywhere, but we made the case that this is added funds that are needed for those three very vital pools of money and initiatives that we need to continue to fund and fund better. And that has opened up a revenue stream to allow us to build more and enhance and maintain more. The second aspect I talked about was partnerships. We are incredibly lucky in Boston that we have some great institutes of higher education. I know Councillor Wharton is an alumna of Harvard College, Harvard and Radcliffe Colleges. Harvard is the partner that runs and operates the Arnold Arboretum in the heart of my district, which I will invite you both, if you are ever in Boston, I will happily give you both a tour. It's one of my favorite places on the planet. And it is it is a city park that's run by Harvard University, and it is one of the finest arboretums in the world. Over the last year, we have seen park usage increase by numbers unprecedented during the pandemic. More and more people are going out, more and more people need it. Lord knows it was my saving grace, being able to go out and just get some, masked up fresh air, but at least being able to get out of the house. So I am confident that that will continue going forward, but it has to come down to funding. And I think passage of the Community Preservation Act has proven that people are willing to put a little more money into it, to a tangible benefit like parkland and open space. That truly is the great equalizer that benefits everybody and benefits everything. It is so important for cities, as we talk about growth in cities, as we talk about people fleeing cities, to be able to offer this amenity to our residents and our visitors. It's one of the most important things we should be doing from not only an environmental point of view, but a public health point of view as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you, both very good answers. I actually want to go to the Q&A now. And here's a question from Ruth Kaplan. Can you comment on the impact of national versus local policy initiatives? How much can cities do on their own, and how important are state or federal government environmental laws in addition to what you can do as a municipality? Who'd like to take that one? Councillor O'Malley?
Sure.
Okay.
Happy to it. And Ellie Kaplan's mother is one of my favorite constituents, so I'm always happy to answer her questions. It's a hard thing. And again, I came to elective office in 2010 under President Obama. In 2016, of course, Donald Trump was elected and gutted many of the environmental protections and legislation that President Obama had put forward. It made our jobs difficult in many ways that we certainly weren't getting the support. The benefit of that, if I can use a word, is that it really, I think, helped spur some incredible movement and momentum in the environmental protection movement going forward. I know I certainly felt I won't say a renewed sense of purpose, because I've always been driven by this, but certainly a renewed sense of urgency when the federal government is not acting, or in some case undoing some impressive and important environmental regulations. It really underscored the urgency of acting now and really pushing things forward. And as the United States is, leaving the Paris Climate Accords and rolling back on some really important environmental protections, the UN's ICC is coming out with this terrifying report that we have essentially, at that point, I think it was 12 years, now we're down to 9 years, to really get it right. So that was really my impetus of putting forward some really aggressive climate goals and legislation. And it was able to garner more support than perhaps it would have otherwise, because we knew that we had no guidance from the federal government. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And I think it then allowed us to get to the point now where we are actually putting forward some a really effective and ambitious legislation, and I'm hopeful that it's not too late and we'll continue to do so. But it's a great question, because just the whole tone and tenor of the environmental movement is so much different now than it was a year ago, much more so for the better now. But it underscores that no matter which party is in power or which, who serves as EPA administrator for the country, there's the ability to really affect change at the local level no matter what. And the urgency is often increased depending on what the national tone and tenor looks like.
Right. Thank you. And Councillor Wharton, the Israeli Ministry for Environmental Protection has been historically the smallest ministry in the government, with a small budget, not a lot of teeth. Is the ministry able to provide any kind of backing, any kind of guidance? Do you feel there's any kind of national policy towards sustainability coming out of the government?
There has been, as I take it most people listening now know, we haven't really had a government for a couple of years now. So it's been a really rough time. The government does help and has helped in certain basic things. One is in setting some fundamental standards. There are laws that have been put into effect requiring cities to display measures of the air pollution and various other things, which I'm glad they put in place. There are also things that the government have done to provide incentive. They put out tenders, for example, for recycling. And when there are cities that say they're willing to recycle and to promise that they'll set aims for percentages of recycling, they've financed things like the containers for recycling, and they give a certain amount of funding. So there are some basic things that have been done, but I think you are quite correct in saying that the national government has not done enough to really push things as it could. In terms of what we can do despite that, is that we can decide on certain allocations on our own, and also we can bring things up to the national government. For example, I mentioned the gardens, the community gardens and stuff. That's something that was very quickly developed here and now other cities. And I hope that the national government will also start helping support. Also things like bicycle lanes and so forth. That has been entirely done by the city in Jerusalem, and before us, a lot of work was done in Tel Aviv for that. We're hoping that at some point, either the environmental protection ministry or other ministries will help. What's been happening up till now is that a lot of our contact with the national government that relates to environmental issues has been with the Ministry of Transportation, which on the one hand has funded all of our light rail system. But on the other hand is always a battle with us because we want more and more light rails, and they keep on building more and more highways that are mostly directed at making it easier to, to drive into the city in a private car, which we're trying to discourage. So try to sum it up, I would say that there are things that the national government could do and has done, but definitely not enough. And I hope that whoever is our Minister of Transportation, when we get one, a new one, will be more in tune with the kinds of things that the people here are interested in, which is doing more for public transportation and trying to wean us away from our private cars.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley, I have a question here, I think directed at you from Stanley Goodman, and it actually relates to something you mentioned previously about plans to offer free public transportation, at least buses, if I understood correctly. Yep. So the question is, since some Boston mayoral candidates are proposing free public transit, how will it be funded? Do you know what the necessary tax increase would be to support free transportation?
No, it's a great question, Stanley. And it's what's the expression? You campaign in poetry and govern in prose. It's sometimes a lot harder to get those details out. I think, though, if I may, and I'm not, I would allow the mayoral candidates, of whom I am not one of them, sort of come up with their own funding plan. But I think the important thing as it relates to the T is right now it is a state-run agency. And when the difference is that the state controls how money is allocated, how resources are spent. Boston has a very small voice on the operations of the T, despite the fact that the ridership of the T is not exclusively Bostonians, but I would venture a guess in terms of at least where the bus stops and the non-commuter rail subway stations are is 90% plus Bostonians. We also contribute significantly to it. So I think that if we're serious about having a piloted program, looking at fare-free buses, for example, there has to be some state funding. There would be some city resources that go as well, but city resources already go there. Earlier, I had spoken about how the building boom in Boston is, despite the pandemic, probably it was the top three building booms in Boston's 400-year history a couple of years ago. I'm sure we're in top two, if not number one at this point. Looking at new growth and how that money is spent, we could also be tapping into some of our nonprofits, colleges, and universities for our revenue stream for this. Right now, nonprofits pay zero in property taxes, and nonprofits account for about half of the property in the city of Boston. So I'm talking about obviously our hospitals, but more so our colleges and universities, of which there are dozens, to come up with a funding formula that would allow for to help subsidize the cost. And also looking at some private enterprise as well. It will make sense for, and many companies do this on their own volition anyway, where they will give a discounted or a free T-Pass to their employees. So I think the question is, there's no doubt there would be a cost to the taxpayer to actually implement this program, but there are other creative ways that we could look at funding through nonprofits, through obviously state funding, which has to be increased, and also looking at new growth and new property development as it comes down the pike.
Great, thank you. Councillor Wharton, there's a question for you from Stuart Schoenfeld, who says that Haaretz has carried worrying reports about new access roads to Jerusalem. Do you have any comment? Do you know what the issue is, and are those plans settled?
I do know, I'm familiar with the issue. They're basically what's been published lately that has been developing, and I've been part of a protest against, is that the Ministry of Transportation that I mentioned before has been developing the three major entrances to the city and developing new highways that will be bringing people in. At this point, the major entrance to the city is from the west, from Tel Aviv, and that is being expanded, and there's another highway being built, and there's another one that's going to be farther south, and another one from the east. And it poses a number of problems. One is that as part of the general highway system, it'll be encouraging more people to come in by cars. Another problem that is very obvious now is that it'll involve cutting down a lot of trees and eating away even further at the green areas that are on the periphery or just outside of the city. And it's also a problem in that it's, they're very expensive projects that mean that whatever budget the Ministry of Transportation has, they will be taken from these roads and not going, instead of going towards moving the plans for the mass transport, for the light rail along. Some of these plans are already too far along for me to believe they can be stopped, but we are working on it. There is a plan for another road in the south of Jerusalem, another major entrance that we're trying to at least minimize and cut back, and there has been some work done on that. But yes, it is a big problem and is very, very worrisome, as I said, for all angles. And it's also a problem I'll just mention in that if the previous question was about coordination between national or federal government and local government, at least one of these plans, the most recent one, was kind of dropped onto the people in charge of planning local transportation, city transportation. So it's not only was it a bad idea, but just managing it is very difficult because it wasn't done in coordination with all the planning of things like the bus lanes that I mentioned. I hope we can minimize the damage. Let me put it that way.
Great. So we're coming to the end of our session, and I really want to thank both Councillor O'Malley and Councillor Wharton. I want to give each one of you a chance to give a message to the next generation. In my opinion, if I were part of the next generation, I would be quite angry right now at us, at this generation. And the question is, what's our answer to them? What positive message can we give? What hope can we give that we, as you mentioned, Councillor O'Malley, can turn this thing around? Who wants to try their hand? You got 30 seconds each.
I'll start, maybe. I'll say our message is that I would say that we have woken up to a lot of things late, but it's definitely not too late. And I just would encourage the young people to speak up, to speak out, and to help form coalitions that can, do more good and minimize the damage. I think one thing that we didn't talk about that's very important, but I believe you mentioned, was the issue of education. Both of you, Councillor O'Malley, and you, as the director, mentioned how much you were influenced in your youth. And I hope that in Jerusalem and everywhere, to everyone listening, will be able to work that more into our education. I am proud of the fact that in recent years, the municipality has managed to get it more in the education system, and not only in the typical places that you'd expect in the liberal schools and so forth, but also in the Arab sector. It's very much developed, and also even in the ultra-Orthodox sector where traditionally they haven't been very much aware. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a great question. I would say, I preface it by saying what gives me hope that in the US, we have seen young people step up to leadership positions on racial equity, on gun controls, and certainly on the environment. And that's what gives me great hope. So I would say to young people watching, continue to push us, your elected officials, until you have a chance to run for office yourself. And to those of us who used to be young people and are now less so, let's push ourselves to do the right thing. Laura's absolutely right. It's not too late. It's close to being too late, but we're already seeing a whole sea change on acceptance that we need to really implement innovative and aggressive climate policy, and we'll do that. We have to do that. We have no other choice. And I feel hopeful that we are going to get it right, but it's going to take tremendous work, and it's going to take work happening together. But the mere fact that we are having this conversation from two incredible cities really united in the work that lays ahead of us gives me great hope that we're going to be able to do this.
Thank you. Thank you both. You've been great panelists, and thank you very much to Ambassador Rubin and to the General Counsel and to the Friends of the Arvai Institute for hosting this event. I turn it back to you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Councillor O'Malley, and thank you, Councillor Wharton. It really has been wonderful to listen in. Some of the things as a new Bostonian that Councillor O'Malley had to say about pre-COVID Boston doesn't exactly sound too wonderful, especially when it comes to traffic. But I am enjoying the city, especially the parks and the greenery that exist here. And I even still enjoy the snow and the cold. So we'll see how long that lasts. And Congressman Wharton, I definitely hope that we will see you on the continent of North America in the summer, and maybe we'll be able to have a personal meeting with you and the Boston Council, and I'll invite everybody for falafel.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Once again,
Thank you to all
thank
of
you
you.
very much, and thanks everybody, and thanks for